Hello and welcome to today's episode, sponsored by the wonderful Hachette Learning Academy. This is the EdTech podcast where we explore the intersection of education and technology, and I'm your host, Philippa Wraithmell. Today we have a very special guest who I've not only had the delight of being able to see on stage delivering keynotes, but also been able to chat to when I've bumped into her at one of our many conferences. It's the wonderful Laura Knight. Laura is a former teacher and leader with over 20 years of experience in the UK education sector. She now runs her own consultancy focusing on digital strategy and AI, and she's here to share her insights on how technology can be used effectively in education. We're going to be discussing everything from digital literacy and safeguarding to the challenges and opportunities presented by AI in schools. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea, and get ready for an enlightening conversation. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. And if you haven't heard our previous Hachette Learning Academy episodes, please look back in the catalogue and find them. There's been some brilliant conversations. Hello and welcome to the EdTech podcast. Today I have the fabulous Laura Knight with us. Laura, would you please be able to introduce yourself to our global audience?
Delighted. Thank you so much, Philippa, for having me. So yes, my name is Laura Knight. I am a former teacher and leader of 20 years in the UK. And I now run a consultancy working in the education space, particularly on digital strategy and AI. General troublemaker, occasional. I like to, provoke a good discussion. So I hope today will bring some interest and some timely thoughts to people who are listening from all around.
That is brilliant. And we do love people who cause a little bit of a ruckus. So that's nice to hear. And so I guess one of the big questions that I think everybody's really interested to hear is kind of what is your main focus? So because EdTech's huge, digital strategy is massive. What's your kind of passion part of it? What's the bit that you find yourself talking and working in most?
So I'm very fortunate to have a few strands here, which kind of weave together in a lovely, coherent way. Broadly speaking, in the broadest way, I am interested in using technology well in education. And that comes from a real sense of thinking about what is pedagogically sound, like research-backed and actually impactful, but also what serves children and young people, teachers, schools and leaders the most effectively and efficiently. But also that I talk a lot about more joy in classrooms. Quite often, we can get bogged down in digital strategy or thinking about AI and tools and procurement and all these things. And actually, I'm really interested in unlocking conversations which help us think about well-being, which help us think about safeguarding, which help us think about professional satisfaction, creativity, engagement, all of that. So I'd say I'm pretty holistic. Typically, a lot of the work that I do supports leaders, and I work both on the kind of pedagogical curriculum assessment side, as well as the sort of pastoral and safeguarding piece, but actually not just teaching and learning. I'm also really interested in the operational side of schools. So I do quite a lot of work with bursars, for example, admin teams. I run a lovely day for heads, PAs and EAs with one of the leadership societies. And I'm also really keen to support governance. So I do quite a lot of training for governors and folks involved, like trustees, that kind of thing, in oversight in schools, supporting everybody with those messages around good decision making. I like to empower people to feel like they can make good choices around technology and often to demystify some of the things that have perhaps in the past been cloaked in this kind of, mystery, expertise, gatekeeping, that kind of thing. So yeah, a little bit of grounded humanity, good sense, maybe a splash of wisdom. That's the goal.
That sounds brilliant. And I love the way that you bring it together. And I think that holistic approach is so vital. Actually understanding all of those elements is how you were able to then empower those very specific parts of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it means I'm not just like churning out a keynote in front of whoever sits in front of me. There's very much custom and bespoke strategy and discussion and training and learning and policy and all of these things. So no 2 days are the same for me. And unfortunately, in terms of my preparation, very rare that you'll see two identical slide decks as well. Like there's an awful lot of shifting and movement, and it's right that should happen, right? In this space in particular, where things are moving so quickly. I mean, it's not that I cringe, but I look back at things that I wrote a year ago and think, my goodness me, like this, we have moved on. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to keep learning. I think the inner geek in me is very strong. And I love the fact that there is so much fresh, new, interesting, and kind of, challenging aspects to the work that I do around digital strategy. These are issues that need careful reflection and analysis. And often there's a lot of nuance and context-specific care that's needed with this work. So I find that really satisfying, but I recognize too that it can be really disorientating for leaders who are perhaps less confident or savvy or just less experienced in the space. You've got a million other things on as well. So I try to be the person they can rely on to bring them, good sense, actually.
Yeah, and it's incredible, isn't it? Because actually, I do a similar thing. You look back kind of 5 or 6 years and think, God, what was I talking about? I know so much more now. But you're right. The rapid pace of things that are evolving, especially around the safeguarding side of things, with obviously the implementation of AI so broadly now. Obviously, we're all aware it was here before, but now it's so prolific.
Yeah.
So many different areas are so much more in the forefront of people's minds. And I bet that it must be something that is ever evolving and fast paced.
It is. And it's one of the most satisfying parts of the work that I do, because I feel like in the conversations I have, whether that's in person, in rooms, whether I'm running webinars or I'm sharing papers that I've written, there is something really meaningful about people going away from that interaction better informed about the challenges and risks and how to manage those. I feel really strongly that safeguarding is hard, right? But I think one of the wonderful things that's happened during the course of my career is that there is now a complete sense of ownership and responsibility in every teacher around that particular aspect of what it means to be a professional. What's tricky here, though, is that unlike some of the other areas of safeguarding, when you're thinking about, kind of harms that have been around in society forever, these new sorts of harm that can arise through technology that's so disruptive can feel really scary. Not least because we don't have a sense of the shape of them. We can't anticipate it in the way that we might with things where we've seen patterns before. And that can be very scary indeed. And I think one of the things that's difficult, particularly, and I think about in the last week for myself, there is an amazing creative joy that comes from all the possibilities of generative AI, right? There's so many things we can make and do and learn and grow, and it's really cool. And there's all this fizzing enthusiasm, especially in the sorts of circles that I move in, about this tool or that app. Brilliant, great fun. And I enjoy that discovery for myself. Like, I had a lovely time using a tool to kind of it's a bit like vibe coding, but visually work out what an app might look like that I'm trying to build with a colleague. But at the same time, I'm going through a whole thing like with my own son, right, whose school, their trusts have been through absolute hell. And my heart hurts for them because in the last couple of weeks, there has been an incident where deepfake imagery, sexualized imagery of teachers was made and shared, which is so traumatic for the individuals involved, of course, who are victims, and so often like women and girls in that position. Like it's deeply scarring. But the whole community is affected. My son comes home from school telling me about the assembly. I don't often hear about assemblies from my son, but this one really got to him. And so that kind of thing ripples through a community because it feels not anymore like some kind of distant possibility, but there's something's very lived in the reality of right now. So I feel like that kind of shift from the abstract into the much more defined can be really challenging here. And from a safeguarding perspective, there are not enough learned experiences and real examples for teachers and leaders to fully understand yet. We have to grapple with the unknown. And this is actually where I think there's such strength in conversation, in sharing, and specifically, actually, in a very low-tech CPD kind of tool, which is scenario-based learning. Give people lots of scenarios to discuss and help them unpack what the best next thing to do is and create certainty through that conversation. That feels to me so important right now.
As you were talking then, and I'm so glad you started to talk about that scenario-based, because one of my questions I've just sort of scribbled down was that kind of, students and young people, children, adults, parents, everybody are trying to navigate this digitalization and this world that is just here upon us, whether we like it or not. There's lots of things we can block everything, cancel everything, and do what we like. We're still going to be there. But actually, I wonder how many principals and schools believe that it won't happen to us. It's a bit like, a cyber attack. Oh, it won't happen to us. And actually, when it really does, it is almost worse.
And there's something very shaming about being the victim of that kind of story. And I can't overemphasize how important it is for folks to actually get past that shame and help others learn from their experience. One of the most powerful things I heard at BET this year actually was on the operational transformation stage. I was hosting there, and on the first day, there was a brilliant session where the director of IT from Filed Academy was sharing their story of being a victim of a cyber attack and what happened for them. I'd never heard it firsthand in that way before, and the very personal and professional impacts for them as a community suddenly became so real. And I think typically folks are going to be thinking about reputational damage and containing the story and managing the messaging and all of that sort of thing. And I think, yeah, that's perfectly reasonable and very sensible. But at the same time, let's help each other understand implications, because in the absence of certainty and real story and lived experience, we just get rumor and we get social media kind of exaggeration, fear mongering, and that isn't necessarily that helpful. If something has happened once, sure, could it happen again? But is it going to happen everywhere? What can we do meaningfully to make sure it doesn't happen to us? That might be a very quick fix. It might be a 15-minute conversation or a quick policy change. It doesn't have to be everything is a calamity. But I'm getting a bit grumpy in my old age. I'm often very enthusiastic, but I do get cross at the number of people who will stand on stages and talk about crisis this and disaster that. And I sort of think that's really unhelpful for school leaders who are trying to navigate meaningfully through these challenges, because there are so many opportunities and a reality that needs facing. It's not okay to just make everything a catastrophe and a disaster and say, right, well, off you go then, have fun with that. Like who wins out of that kind of, exaggeration? Doesn't make sense.
Well, absolutely. And I do just think that, especially with young people, they're going to try and find ways, they're going to do things anyway. How does all of this kind of come into? There's a huge impetus at the moment on removing screens from schools. There's obviously lots of talk around mobile phones, but generally people are so averse because of all these threats and these risks, and it's take it away and take it out of education. And, I'm reading many white papers and documents that are saying, actually, when it's really managed and open and talked about, it's really valuable. But of course, when we do it wrong, like everything is going to have adverse effects. But is it a diversion, or is this something that really could be beneficial?
And again, I think I'm so glad you raised this, Philippa, because I feel very strongly about it. I've felt very strong about it, both as a parent, as a teacher, and now as someone who supports the wider sector, both in terms of sort of the policy and structures that we are looking at here, but also how we can have good conversations with leaders across systems to do things better. I think we have to face up to a couple of quite uncomfortable truths. The first is that we have historically, and I'm talking about sort of from the beginning of social media through to, let's say, 3 years ago, done pretty badly on behalf of the children of the world. I'm talking about my UK context in particular, but also beyond that, because in so many cases, children's needs and safeguards were sort of ignored. And there was this responsibility gap between parenting and school, which seemed to grow daily. And now it's not just a gap, it's the Grand Canyon. And the problem that we are facing in so many of those contexts internationally is that there is a real, a kind of collision of expectations between families and schools about whose responsibility it is to safeguard children and young people in digital spaces. And I think quite rightly, schools have a real conflict here, because there is an inbuilt care and legal responsibility and professional responsibility to say we safeguard these children, we look after the children. But how much can a school genuinely do about a tool that is bought and paid for by an external third party, the family, that is managed by them, that is not connected to the school infrastructure or network or filtered or monitored or safeguarded in any way, but yet the families expect the children's school to do all the work in so many cases. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting, and it's not right. And this absence of care has been, I think, then exacerbated by the monetization of children's attentions. They are their thumbs and eyeballs, right? And there's an entire huge economy built on their attention. And they are marketed to directly. They are part of an economy of attention that has been growing in importance for many, many years, and that we are very, I think, naive about. So if folks haven't read, books like Shoshana Zuboff's book about, surveillance capitalism, I think we should. I think it's our responsibility to understand the economics of that situation. So that piece matters hugely. The second thing that I want to mention is how frustrating it is that we talk about screens. No, we're not talking. Screens aren't the problem. Screens are entirely neutral. They are just a window into a technology. The screen itself is of no consequence. And to talk about screen time is actually just a nonsense. And I talk in my white paper about this and have been talking about it for some time. So for folks who've heard me before, I will be unapologetically repeating myself here when I say that to talk about screen time is about as ridiculous as it is to talk about food time when thinking about nutrition. Would you for a moment consider the value of someone's nutritional inputs in their diet and the balance and the calories and the vitamins and minerals? Would you even consider the time it takes to eat as a sensible measure of those inputs? Of course you wouldn't. That's absolutely ridiculous. And yet we have caught ourselves in this lazy, very easy to measure, but utterly meaningless metric. And it's so unhelpful because it doesn't account for engagement. It doesn't account for the quality of interaction. It doesn't account for risk or harm. It doesn't account for learning, actually. And that for me is so frustrating because there's now this bandwagon that folks have leapt onto. Ironically, parents, so many of them have leapt onto it on social media themselves. The WhatsApp groups and the Facebook posts are buzzing. Can we please notice? Can we? So isn't it bananas, though, that there is a paradox there, and may I say, a hypocrisy there about the same families who, in many cases, are involved themselves in this sort of digital, I'm going to say neglect, actually, have caused a systemic problem by not demanding more of the companies that they engage with, by not expecting more in terms of safeguards and monitoring and tools and all the rest of it. And so now the only way forward appears to be, well, we've got to block and ban everything, or we've got to police the hell out of it, suck the joy out of it, and make it as miserable as possible. And that for me is just so depressing. So I often talk, just to finish this point about blocking and banning, because screen time and blocking and banning for me are the part of the same issue, is that we are making the expectation very visible here that we don't think people are capable of learning. Now, as educators, that hurts my heart. And I think it is absolutely possible, not just possible, but should be expected that as part of our mission to prepare young people, children and young people, for a life of thriving and future success in whatever way might best suit the individual and their potential, part of that has to be digital, because life is partly digital in so many contexts. And so to assume that we can just say, no, we don't do that, we're just going to not, and that's going to be a problem we push up the road, says to me, I'm friends, you're failing the mission. And I also, I often talk about parenting here. And when I'm talking to a room full of parents, I may be a little bit mean, but I think this story is useful. So I want you to imagine, especially if you're a parent, this will feel very familiar. I want you to imagine going to a children's birthday party with your child. And it's the first time that you can drop your child off and leave. Oh, it's a beautiful day. That moment is lovely. It's a bit like when your child can first do up their own seatbelt in the car. You feel like you are living like a king. But that moment at the children's birthday party where you leave your child socially with their set of friends with a birthday spread in front of them is quite a big moment. Now, I want you to imagine the child who has never, ever been allowed sugar. And they're perhaps 8 years old. They've never had any sugar because their parents have micromanaged their diet and have been very keen to make sure that they're super healthy, etc., etc. But that child at the age of 8 has got precisely no self-awareness, understanding, self-regulation, or indeed limits about what is sensible. So that the moment that they are outside the control of their parents, the chances are that that child will either freeze, not engage, and not be able to participate at all, which seems terribly sad with their group of friends at the birthday party, or they gorge themselves on chocolate biscuits until they are sick. And both of those are a calamity and such a waste. That child needs to be taught how to handle the chocolate biscuits in the same way that adults do. She says, as a chocolate biscuit enthusiast, but I know that much like hours and hours on TikTok, packets and packets of chocolate biscuits are not going to serve me well. But that is learning. And it is our responsibility as adults, both as parents and as teachers, to deliver that learning. So I think we need to do better. And I think part of that is around social and emotional learning and character. And part of it is around digital literacy, AI literacy, and understanding how the world of the digital economy and structures and social media and AI and how it all really works and what your part in it with agency, that matters.
I have to say, everything you just said fills me with joy. That gorgeous word that you used, it's just exactly what everybody needs to hear. So I'm so glad that you vocalize it so beautifully. And I love the analogy because in my head, as an ex-food tech teacher, that was kind of my first role as an NQT, was to teach food to everyone in the world, having barely any cooking skills. Was that the Eat Well plate? How I always used to have an issue with the Eat Well plate because you can put a cake into the Eat Well plate and technically it is nutritionally balanced because it has areas of everything.
A strawberry on the top and you can have 3, right?
Oh, 100%. So yeah, you give me a Victoria sponge and you have nailed that. You can just eat that all day long. And this is that is such a great way of doing it. Is, we'll all, people use fitness trackers and apps and they put their food in and they look at the different nutritional values and then they learn about it. And you know what? Some people don't learn and they have issues with food and they go either way. And that's exactly the same way. I just love that analogy. It really feels like something that could be so much easier to digest.
Really, and the moment that you don't know that, like if you never come to terms with your own challenges, like self-awareness is such a gift, isn't it? And it's more than a gift; it's a skill that we learn. And the moment that we choose to not give that opportunity to a child to understand themselves and to know that all of the urges and wants and needs in their body do not serve them well. And all of the urges and needs and wants that are manufactured by things, beings, entities, people, platforms and services external to them certainly don't want the best for them. What they want is to monetize or to, kind of manipulate. And I think there is a naivety around this that's really alarming. It's alarming in terms of well-being, but it's alarming in terms of safeguarding. And if there are still too many folks who naively feel that they're entitled, that the world owes them a favor, that everyone wants the best for them, then good luck. But it's not going to end well.
No, I think it comes down to as well that probably that fear of addressing our emotional regulation. As a parent myself, I've got a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old. I've got an 11-year-old who knows very well that the 15-year-old didn't get social media till he was 13. And actually my conversation with him now is, you're not going to have it even then probably because they're going to ban it. And I'm not the parent that will go, oh yeah, sure, you're okay to go on it even though the law says, which is a lot of what's happened. That regulation of that has taken years. I call them the screen time kids because they have always been screen timed. They have always been told what, that they can or cannot do in the same way, exactly as you said with the food. Although the sugar bit reminds me of a moment in Home Centre where Jacob had a small Easter bunny and my husband and I looked at each other as he was whizzing down the aisles. Why on earth?
We knew what happened there.
We were like, sugar. And it was because he just didn't really ever have any. On his first birthday, he spat out his chocolate cake. And so it just made me giggle because I thought, we learnt that lesson of actually, no, you just don't restrict.
Absolutely. And that self-regulation thing is like in that moment you learn, don't you? You see it. But it's really hard. It's really hard. But then there is this problem, isn't there, between self-regulation and a race to the bottom for children and young people and actually for adults, if we're honest, because we've been primed. And the iPad generation, like the kids who were handed a device to soothe them before they could even speak, like under the age of 1, they have been primed to soothe their every discomfort, every moment of boredom, of isolation, of frustration, of rage, of whatever it might be, to soothe it with digital, whether it's through scrolling, whether it's through, curating your wish list or choosing your avatar or whatever it is. Like there's all these ways in which we distract ourselves to numb and soothe our inner pain.
And you say that, though, so sorry to cut in, but the parent bit is the bit that gets me because the parents are not realizing we do that to ourselves. Like it takes a lot as adults to stop doing that to ourselves. And so we're role modeling these issues and problems and then wondering why it's all gone so terribly wrong.
Right. And then you wonder why your kids are sneaking around behind your back or logging into, the dad's 9-year-old iPad that's in the bottom drawer in the spare bedroom because there is a fix that's needed. There's this kind of compelling nature to that dependence that I feel it's really difficult to get around without teaching self-regulation and sitting in discomfort and understanding that frustration is part of life, that learning is hard. And if anytime we're learning something new, we're going to have to sort of learn to sit with discomfort. So it's really sad in a way that we can both kind of coddle young people and also insulate them from the learning that they need so much in this space.
So with that, I mean, that's a huge problem. It's a generational issue that we've created and caused within really in a decade. We've done a pretty good job of doing that quite quickly.
I'm going to push back on that for a moment. And you and I are not a dissimilar age, Philippa, but I'm very much on the kind of cusp between being Gen X and a millennial, but I consider myself Gen X. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, if you look at how boomer parents parented their Gen X children, and you think about the domestic technology of the time, it was those kids when teenagers were handed the remote, the DVD video player, the satellite TV, all of that kind of domestic entertainment technology. Boomer parents were like, this is too hard. I don't do this. Like you can sort it out. Like you were in charge. You were the only one who could set the clock on the VCR after the time had changed so that you could still record Mum's episode of ER. Like that was your superpower. And the problem is that, and this goes to the sort of, it speaks to the digital natives problem, I think, like that this is the generation who were called digital natives because they understood how to like press. There are only 3 buttons you could press, to be honest. And so there was this sort of expectation
all
that
together.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, when you think about how those Gen X parents have then parented their own children, yikes, they've taken that same sense of kind of, this isn't my job, I don't really do this stuff, like you sort it out and that for me is so problematic, because what we're seeing is the same sort of power being given, instead of like kids having the equivalent of the firepower of a spud gun, we've given them nukes. Like, do you see what I mean? Like that, for me, it's just madness.
Hachette Learning Academy is a growing suite of interactive online CPD courses powered by adaptive technology, designed to bring the benefits of one-to-one coaching to every teacher. The Academy offers flexible, personalised professional learning that fits around busy schedules. Each course is built around a competency framework aligned with international teaching standards, helping educators strengthen the skills that drive effective teaching and lasting career growth. For more information, just visit www.hachettelearning.com/academy.
I've never thought of it like that at all. And I absolutely love it. I'm so on board with that. You are so right. And even, I mean, generationally as well, I've got 2 older brothers. So actually I was third in line to the remote control, which also, well, I know, well, that almost meant that I had less knowledge and less power. But that is such a great thought to have, of actually that kind of assumption. And really, aside from perhaps watching TV late at night or maybe recording something you weren't meant to, or watching a video of your parents that wasn't, you couldn't really do too much that was bad. So actually, yeah, that assumption that technology is okay, it's just something new that we're all going to use.
And then what's really interesting is that the more that older generation disempowers itself and says, I'm a dinosaur, at the same time as gifting all of the control with none of the life skills to the younger generation, the bigger the gap grows, and the more that the dinosaurs are discrediting themselves of being any sort of form of useful authority, as well as being able to say, I can't even set boundaries and limits that are meaningful. So the boundaries and limits that I'm setting for you are the ones that I'm capable of understanding, because I'm a dinosaur and I'm hopeless and I don't understand anything. And that's the kids hearing that and saying, so you don't get it, you don't respect it, and you're telling me what to do? Well, I'm just going to work my way around that, obviously. And you get a race to the bottom in terms of devious behavior. So nobody is served by these old lazy myths. Dinosaurs, get it in the bin. Digital natives, bin. Gotta go in the sea.
Hate that term. Hate that term.
Because nobody is served by these lazy ideas. And in fact, they are disempowering at every stage for the people who need to hold the limits and the authority and the knowledge and the skill. And then they put too much power in the hands of people who have no knowledge or skill or experience to use it. They might be a little bit less risk averse about pressing the buttons, but that's it.
Yeah. And that is so true. Okay, so the big question here really is, how do we address that? So how do we we make change? Because that is mindset change, that is change management. I'm somehow
you've got fireworks.
Sparks behind me. For listeners, there was a whole host of fireworks.
A whole holo.
I don't know how it happened. I sound like a dinosaur. There you go. Terrible. I don't know what happened there, but it looked amazing. Where do we go? Because it's that whole thing of people who are assumed to be dinosaurs, creating policies and creating things top down and passing them on to people who are passing off as oh, I don't know what I'm doing because I'm not of your generation.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we get to fix this? How is that creation done? What do we do?
Okay, so I think there are a couple of things I want to say. The first is that schools have been for many years trying to run events and support and provide inputs for parents on this. And typically you'd run an e-safety evening or something along those lines, and you get 3 people there or 5 people in the dog or whatever it is. And for the most part, they're the 5 people who least need to be there. And everyone who you want to reach doesn't come. And this is really troubling and frustrating for schools who are like, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to support parents, and parents aren't coming. Now, think for a moment about the psychology of this. If you know that you're going to be told off, are you going to show up? Friends? No, you're not. You're going to sit and eat chocolate biscuits or whatever else you're trying to do, like to avoid. But you're not going to go because shame is an incredibly powerful vector for avoidance, even just the possibility of shame. And there are so few parents who are proud of what they do with their kids and their phones and their devices and their gaming and everything else because it all feels like a battle. The very first thing we need to do is remove the stigma about conversation and accept that everyone is struggling and no one wants to be preached to. So put that waggy finger away. Step 1. Step 2, I think, so once we've got rid of some shame, we need to think about 2 or 3 more positive approaches. And I would say there is a great opportunity here for peer support. So actually, parents supporting parents, children supporting children. So looking at your existing structures, for example, your parents' association or your form reps or whatever it is that you have, can you run a train-the-trainer model with those people who are leaders and influencers in their sort of little micro circles so that it doesn't feel like a top-down waggy finger. It instead feels like support to deal with challenges. And you give those people a bank of credible, curated, research-backed resources, a framework of approaches to take so that when they're going to their coffee mornings and their, kind of charity dinners and whatever else, those people are empowered with the right information. The final piece is, I think, is around coaching and children. And I feel like children need to be coached and need to possibly mentored as well, but they need to be having the sorts of conversations that coaching can unlock, so that you can dig into the big feelings behind the numbers here. So the screen time metrics might tell you something. So you might look at like a kid's use of their phone and see that they're spending hours doing this or scrolling on that or playing this or whatever. And that in and of itself is a useful metric potentially, but not to tell them off and say you're spending too much time. What actually we should be doing in a conversational way is unlocking. So tell me about this. Oh, well, when the house is really noisy, I just have to escape and I just go upstairs and scroll on TikTok until it's quiet again. Okay, so actually the device is not the problem. The fact that this child has got sensory overwhelm and doesn't feel comfortable in the living spaces in their home, that's the issue. So we need to dig a little, and that needs to happen on a one-to-one or small group basis. So I feel like actually for the technology solutions aren't technological here. I'm not saying more monitoring tools, more screen time, lockdowns. I take that for granted that parents need to handle that stuff. They need to have those things in place, and we can talk more about my recommendations if you'd like. But actually, in order to unlock better conversations, strategies need to be used to make those conversations possible and to equip the people having them with the skills and knowledge they need. And that, I think, is quite disruptive in lots of schools where you sort of thought, well, hang on a minute, I've been able to stand on the stage and give an assembly for everything else. Why can't I do it now? This is too complex, I think, for that.
Agree. And I think I really love that approach of that kind of train-the-trainer model, because your people listen to their peers.
Yes.
And those WhatsApp groups do go wild. And actually, when it's parent to parent, it's a lot easier. Although there is still parental peer pressure, which I've found has been...
and sort of competitive shaming that seems to happen. Like you can't win, you can't expect harmony, but we can at least make sure that what is being shared you can empower people to challenge nonsense. I think that's important, and misinformation. And then you can also infiltrate the WhatsApp groups proactively and ethically with some good stuff. And I feel like, we're throwing mud at the wall, let's at least throw some good mugs.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things from that as well is I think it's starting young. It's starting when children are almost with parents at preschool and,
For sure.
even nursery groups and then those kind of first instances in school when actually the conversations are really easy and they're not challenging, and it's not odd to ask your child about lots of different things and talk about all sorts of nonsense at the dinner table and those times where we have, really nice intimate connections. And it's those things that I believe as well are also those foundations, because otherwise we build the wall. And if we start to build it when they're little, we're never going to knock it down.
No, absolutely. And I feel very strongly that there's so much that can be done around early boundary setting, early digital literacy, beginning the journey when it comes to character, self-awareness, these other things around self-regulation that we've been talking about. But also there is an unquestionable ease with which a parent of a 4-year-old can put rules in place. It's very hard if you wait till they're 14 to start.
Absolutely. My 14-year-old, or when he was 14, was already 6 foot and I'm only 5'2". I can tell you it's challenging.
It's when you're trying to tell him off looking up.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's that idea of doing something when people are looking at their little one and going, but they're so tiny, it doesn't matter now and it's okay. And not thinking about that progression, because you always think, oh, they're going to always be this small.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think future you as a parent will be very grateful that, when you were the parent of a 4-year-old, you did this stuff. Like, I think there is an investment in your future sanity that's definitely worth considering.
Definitely. And I guess on that point, I think, so what are some of the things that as parents or teachers that we need to be really considering that young people are at risk or the threats to them? And how do we maybe have those conversations around these kind of digital?
Okay, I think so. If we want to sort of dive right in with some of the AI shaped challenges, I would start with synthetic intimacy as being on my kind of top list of concerns, and how easy it is for humans of any age to find themselves in situations with AI tools where they are lulled into a sense of attachment, connection, and even dependence with that platform or service. And this is particularly concerning for our younger pupils and especially also our more vulnerable youngsters, the neurodivergent, and our SEND pupils in particular, who may struggle in additional ways around discernment, judgment, understanding the difference between reality and fantasy, that kind of thing. There are so many challenges here because we understand how a child might seek out play, support, fun, fantasy in all sorts of wholesome and rather lovely ways in online kind of environments. But we need to understand how that can tip into something much more concerning, or indeed, damaging, harming for those young people, and certainly inappropriate too. And I particularly want to talk about how on a number of the platforms that provide these kinds, like for example, your AI best friend or whatever it is, like your imaginary AI companion, in so many cases, the impetus is pushed towards the sexual and the intimate because that's the part that's monetized. And so on the free subscription, you get the Friends version. But if you want it to get sexy, then you have to pay your $14.99 a month. Now, it makes total sense when we look at it in that kind of cold calculating way that, of course, then the AI chatbot is primed to flirt with the user who is very likely lied about their age. And that user who they believe is to all intents and purposes 18, 21, is then being nudged behaviorally towards wanting to engage with the more intimate content, the more sexualized content, because that is what is the financial imperative is. And so for children who've lied about their age and thought this looks fun and kind of like a cartoonized thing, but maybe with boobs or whatever, they're then in this position of like, oh my goodness, this is so exciting and personalized and it knows me and understands me and maybe even loves me. So I would say top of my list of concerns then is that question around synthetic intimacy, particularly AI sort of friendship and relationship style chatbots that are designed to create that kind of bond. You don't only have to look at the news to see how many adults, apparently highly educated, sensible, gainfully employed adults, who find themselves caught up in, I can't possibly have any other relationship because I'm marrying ChatGPT. Like this happens. It's powerful stuff. A 9-year-old cannot possibly navigate this kind of landscape meaningfully and safely. So yes, that synthetic intimacy piece is key. There's a separate piece around character and integrity, particularly when it comes to academic life, that I think matters a lot to me here, because we're seeing young people find it incredibly easy to just ask Snapchat for the answers to everything and not have to sit with a question themselves, whether it's the question for homework or what they should do in a tricky dilemma, or how to handle their friends falling out, or, you know, what they're going to do this weekend, or what they should put on their pizza tonight. It suddenly seems that the offloading of, it's not just intellectual work, it's just generally, you know, cognition, mental effort.
Yeah.
There is something quite powerful feeling about being able to do that. And I heard Andreas Schleicher from the OECD speaking this week, and he said, you know, have as if tale as long as time, you know, we have sought to exchange our autonomy for convenience. Go back to the Industrial Revolution, like we give up our own autonomy and our skill for speed and convenience. And if we hand that to an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old who doesn't understand that to automate is to de-skill, they don't ever build necessarily the skill, the robustness, the presence of mind, the values and sort of structures that by which they make good decisions. I'm not talking about pizza toppings now. I'm talking about right and wrong, like in those sketchy moments when they're going to need to be able to decide what their best course of action is, not ask AI to give them guidance. So decision-making, character, ethics, this very grounded stuff really matters. And I think it matters not just in those sketchy moments, but it matters for democracy. It sounds like a kind of, you know, fairly sharp turn, but actually when I think about the fact that there are, you know, in the UK, for example, 16-year-olds voting, these are youngsters with very little life experience, but a democratic imperative to understand how the world works, you know, based on their own judgment and experience. Can that democracy be exercised fairly and justly and not be manipulated? I worry about that.
Yeah. And I think all of that as well comes back to other questions around emotional regulation. If we're going to a chatbot for answers to things, we're not going to a human. We're not then working out whether a human is good or bad and is going to help us or not, or to make those mistakes without blaming digital technology, without turning to it and going, well, it was not my fault, it was ChatGPT.
In lots of situations, we might be pleased that the child in question is not just ruminating on their own. Like at a base level, you might be like, oh, I'm glad they're getting some advice or help. But then you think about it a little bit more and you think, if you talk to your friends or your family about something that's bothering you, the people who love you will call you out on your nonsense and will say, no, that is ridiculous. Don't you dare say that. You would get that back from people who love and care about you, because they would give you the reinforcement or indeed the challenge that you need. But let's remember glazing and the way that generative AI in particular is designed to engage you and affirm you and anesthetize you. And so at every stage, you're like told, well, that's a great idea. What a lovely way of thinking. Oh, that's a really good question. No, it's not. It's a terrible question. Like there's nothing but affirmation. And the problem with that is that there is no human judgment. There is only the cozy, comfy bubble that AI wants to wrap you in and keep you present and engaged, because that engagement metric pleases the investors. So I worry that children who only seek validation from AI will never be told no. They will never be called out on their nonsense, and they won't ever hear, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll just consistently be told really great things about themselves and not even then also be able to see the sarcasm. I mean, I go back to kind of having older brothers of I'd come up with this great idea and they'd just look at me and be like, yeah, great idea. You go do that. More so just to see me do it as an absolute plonker and just hope for the giggle. And actually those sorts of things are, you know, on a kind of more jovial like level, they're the things that we're not teaching. We're not humanizing things. And I mean, that's a big problem. I know, having done reports myself on very young children being given mobile phone devices to distract them, or even parents not looking at them because they're looking at their phone. Again, it's that not knowing and not recognizing humanistic traits and just being driven by or growing up through technology. I'd love to be able to just bring it to your white paper. I know you've sort of mentioned it a few times throughout the discussion, but you've obviously written a white paper for Hachette Learning. We'd love to know a little bit about it and kind of how it links to, you know, the 3 pillars. What does that look at? How does it scope things out?
I'm very, very happy to share. So I wrote this white paper with Hachette Learning. It's called Educating the Child, Digital Literacy and Wellbeing. This was this was a combination of things. Essentially, it was the bringing together of some strands of thinking that I'd been working on for a long time. And actually, I first started working on digital wellbeing and some of these aspects sort of back in 2017 or so, when my head teacher at the time, was 2016 even, was very concerned about mobile phones and mobile devices and social media and what we needed to do in the school about it. So I did a research project then internally that then essentially matured into what became my master's dissertation when I did my master's in education. Sort of about 2020, I finished that. So this is work that has kind of been growing through that time. And in this paper, I make the case, if you like, for understanding that digital ecosystems are having an impact on children's learning, on their relationships, on their creativity, but also on their sense of self, and how in education spaces we have very effectively looked at managing risk and regulating access as our prime driver for dealing with the challenges around this. And we can see that in the way that keeping children safe in education in the UK, for example, has evolved over recent years to really push on filtering and monitoring, for example. But what I am proposing in this paper is that instead of just managing risk and regulating access, education's responsibility in a digital age is to cultivate the capacities that young people need in order to participate wisely, ethically, and resiliently in the rapidly changing world. So what I look at in the paper is this sort of balance of principle and practice so that you can build on ethical participation, age-appropriate autonomy, and digital resilience in children. And the way I do that is with these three pillars, which I consider to be developmentally really key. And those three pillars are capability, so that's actually having skill; conscience, so that's building the moral understanding of how the world works and what your place in it is. So integrity, for example, would be in there. And the third thing is courage. And I look at that through the lens of what it takes to be countercultural, how important it is to consider what it means to say no when your impulses and instincts and everything around you digitally is pushing you towards a yes, that kind of thing. And I think that if you can hold on to those sort of three principles, rather than to whatever the technology of the day says is the coolest, shiniest, newest thing, schools can actually equip young people to thrive, even when it's uncertain, and to do so with wisdom and integrity. That's the goal. So it's quite philosophical, honestly. It sounds like it's about technology, but actually I think it's much more about philosophy and thinking about what it means to educate young people today, rather than to kind of keep nudging a 1970s model of education forwards in the hope that it might do the job.
And I think it's a really powerful kind of summary to everything that we've just spoken about, really. That idea of 3 C's, capability, conscious, and courage. I love the courage, by the way. I think that makes it sound, it's just such a great word to use. Really bringing together, all of these things are changing so rapidly. And as you said earlier, it's not about more tech. It's about actually conversations, humanism, bringing ourselves together as communities, watchful eyes, supportive, knowing that we're not all going to be right. We're going to get things wrong, as we always have, even when technology wasn't here.
Absolutely. And isn't it interesting that actually some of the structures that I leaned on and that was really inspired me for this have been around for a really long time. I want to celebrate the brilliant work of Professor Tanya Byron, for example, when she did her Growing Up digital reports in 2008 and then rejudged it again in sort of 2010 or so. And even then, she was talking with such care and wisdom about gaming and about children's approaches to devices. This is not, I don't want to sound like I'm being kind of precious about it. It's not that new, and it shouldn't be seen as perhaps as revolutionary as it might sound to talk about this in this way. But schools don't move fast, and there is this cultural problem around the gap of ownership and responsibility that is still wavering, still uncertain.
And I think something like this, to be able to bring all those different elements and concepts together, the history, the fact that actually lots of these are very industrial concepts that have been working for a long, long time, and actually bringing them to the forefront as well. I do feel like people take notice of a white paper more than they will of an assembly.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really great way as well to be able to engage so many different stakeholders. You mentioned at the beginning, governors, parents, executive assistants, principals, teachers, all of these people are involved in the upbringing of our children and the future of children. And so it feels like a really important piece to be having a little look at and trying to see how that might shape.
Well, I hope so. And I would love to read just a little tiny bit from the conclusion for your audience, because I think there are a couple of things here that really kind of knit these ideas together in a way that I wouldn't be able to, I chose my words carefully when I wrote it. I'm not sure I could pull that off, just riffing here with you, Philippa. I start my conclusion by saying that educating the child for digital life is no longer an auxiliary task. It's a central commitment to their integrity, their autonomy, and their flourishing. The realities of digital ecosystems, with their profound influence on learning, relationships, identity, and emotional development, demand a response rooted not in fear, but in principled action. So the responsibility, I go on to say, is profound, but it's not impossible. It calls for education. I'll say that again. The responsibility is profound, but it's not impossible. It calls for education that is relational, developmental, and wise, for leadership that recognizes complexity without losing clarity, for communities willing to build trust, strength, and discernment steadily, even when the pathways are shifting. I finish it by saying, technology will continue to change, but human needs will not. By educating for capability, conscience, and courage, we do not merely prepare children to survive digital life, we equip them to shape it with judgment, integrity, and grace.
I've got goosebumps.
Thank you.
I love that. And I have to say, the word fear really popped out for me there in terms of I'm going to bungee jump. But I remember, and I go back to being a parent with this, of having to have really difficult conversations all of a sudden. And I just remember thinking, I've got to do it. It doesn't matter how my stomach is churning and turning. I am the adult. I am the grown-up here. And I have to just get on with it. Yes. And so I think that inclusion of that word is really important. But I just feel like the summary of your white paper and the white paper sounds like everything we have discussed. So to listeners who have been engaged in our discussion today, if you feel like, those are things that you really want to know more about, want to know tangible ways in which maybe there are some research methods, different things that you can look at, then I would implore you to have a look at Laura's white paper from Hachette Learning. Laura, it's been a joy. Absolutely. And with my microphone off, I've been giggling away at parts because you are just so passionate and just incredibly just vibrant in everything you talk about. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Philippa. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation just as much as I did. I find listening to Laura so engaging and incredibly enthralling. She has such passion and drive for everything that she does, and her knowledge is profound. I really thank you for tuning into this episode of the EdTech podcast, and we really hope that you enjoyed that conversation, gaining some valuable insights into the world of digital education. I hope that some of her insights not only shocked you into wanting to do more about possibly your procedures and policies in school, about how you're talking to different stakeholders, but also about the fact that everybody is a major player in the game. Because AI isn't going anywhere, and we need to stay on track to help our young people absolutely thrive so that they can survive. And if you found this episode helpful, please consider leaving us a review and sharing it with others who might benefit from it as well. Stay connected with us for more engaging discussions and latest trends and innovation in education technology. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing boundaries of what's possible across education. Goodbye.